Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Kenneth Berger, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure to be sitting down with you today. You're joining us from San Francisco. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the typical mistakes leaders make when trying to drive change or influence others. As we were talking in the pre-interview, this is just something we both are really passionate about, something we think about all the time. And frankly, it's a super common issue. We know that so many change initiatives fail within organizations, or at least they don't have the impact that are intended within organizations. And so well-intentioned leaders often fall short. And there are typical just unnecessary mistakes that are made consistently. There are these pitfalls that people step into that can be avoided. So we're going to talk about this and unpack this together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Kenneth's bio with everybody. Kenneth Berger coaches startup leaders to prevent burnout, take a stand for the life they want, and leave their unique mark on the world at large. After 20 plus years in the tech industry, he's a trusted confidant to startup CEOs, a former founder backed by top investors, and one of communication cornerstone Slack's earliest key hires. He's also seen and felt all the needless pain that these companies can create. His mission is to help business leaders minimize their suffering, maximize their impact, and find peace and balance in their lives. These days, he's working on a book titled Ask for What You Want to share his practical techniques for achieving your dreams with the world. I love that. We'll talk more about Ask What You Want throughout the conversation today. But before we dive on into the broader conversation, is there anything you would like to highlight about your background or personal context?
No, I mean, I think that covers it. I think part of what brought me from the operating roles into coaching was just because I care so much about the emotional side of these experiences, right? That I think it's very easy to get focused on the operational nuts and bolts of how you get things done in a company. And to me, it sort of forgets some of the squishier, more emotional aspects of it. And I think those are often the things that do make us kind of give up on making change or achieving our dreams, even if it's unconsciously. So that's kind of where my passion for this stuff comes from.
Yeah, excellent. And I think implicit in what you were just saying is a lot of times we talk about change, driving change in the workplace, driving, big scale change initiatives in our organizations, but it's also in our personal lives. It's at home, it's in our families, it's in our personal careers, but also just in our non-career related, our personal lives. Maybe there's just a new direction we need to be taking altogether. And so having a framework, having a way of thinking about our lives more generally, I think is also super helpful. And it's something I think we're all striving for, like finding a better balance, especially as we move through life. Perhaps when we're younger and, we just have boundless energy and we're like ambitious and, maybe when we're in our like early 20s and early 30s, we're just like, whatever, gung ho and moving forward. But, that fades for most people. And you start to realize there's kind of more to life than that. And,
Yep.
but then you wonder, well, what are you going to spend your time and energy doing? And there's so many possibilities. There's endless possibilities. So being able to explore that and discover what's right for you, that's sometimes scary for people, frankly. So anyways, great context for why you got into this work and the why behind it and really moving into the ask for what you want kind of framing for what you're doing. Okay, so let's start to unpack some of these types of typical mistakes that leaders make, and feel free at any point to start to pull in some of the ask for what you want stuff into this. But yeah, what are, if you were to like lay out, I don't know, a handful, five things that you see as those most common types of issues, the most common pitfalls, what would those be?
Sure. It's funny to me because I think if you surveyed a bunch of professionals, you wouldn't have anybody saying like, "Oh yeah, I've given up on my dreams. I don't ask for what I want. I don't push for the things I care about in life." Right?
Sure.
Nobody
Yeah.
does that on purpose, right? And yet there are these ways in which we kind of unconsciously or implicitly kind of give up on taking a stand for the things that we want. And so to me, mistake number one is really kind of ignoring how you feel, right? Because I think that often we have a lot of stories about, oh, this is just tough, this is how it is, or, I have to prove myself, and sort of level up before I can, do the things that I really want to do, or I can't show any vulnerability or ask for help or all these sorts of, or I can't, ask for a change in relationship, even if I'm in a very awkward, bad relationship with the people that I work with. And so all these things, we have all these stories about, oh, well, me feeling bad doesn't really matter. It's not a focus, it's not important. And, the irony, of course, is that those feelings are the best and brightest kind of inspiration for really understanding what you want. Because those feelings, right, are shouting in your face, hey, something is not as I want it to be, right? Like, and it's not always exactly the first thing we think or sort of our sort of natural inclination, but often when we start following kind of those threads, we really start to discover, oh gosh, like there's a real pretty significant change I want to make in my life. But it all comes from, in the beginning, not just ignoring it and telling a story that it doesn't matter, life's just hard, you got to deal with it. Um,
Yeah. And I mean, certainly life is hard and we do have to be resilient and we do have to learn to roll with the punches. And, there is an extent to which we have to deal with it. Like, so there is some truth to that, right? But we tell ourselves, I think we tell ourselves the lie that we just endlessly have to deal with it, like we're an abusive relationship or something. And and that's not true, right? Like we
mhm.
do have choices, we do have options, and we can make changes, career changes. We can get into different roles, even if we stay in the same organization. We certainly we can make adjustments or at least mindset shifts in how we're approaching the work that we do that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the irony is that, often we don't go and ask for what we want because we think, oh, it's going to be too stressful or too hard or too risky. And really what we're afraid of is, can I tolerate the emotions of this sort of uncomfortable situation? When already the fact that we're dealing with life not asking for what we want, not pushing for the change that we want to make, that's uncomfortable too. We're already great at tolerating uncomfortable emotions. You can't really help but practice that skill in life. And just the question is, are you going to sit in the status quo, or are you going to find that courage to move forward even through the sort of inevitable uncertainty and discomfort that comes with that?
Yeah, I guess it's the discomfort that we know versus the unknown discomfort, right?
Right.
And that unknown, that uncertainty, that is so scary to people, that oftentimes people just opt for the complete discomfort of what they know.
Mm.
Um, and and I would push on that. I would say, yeah, the unknown can be scary, uncertainty can be scary, but anything's possible, like there's so much upside, there's so much wonderful opportunity that things can improve,
Hmm.
and why stick in a place where you're just stuck? Why stay stuck, when there's so much potential upside? No, things aren't magically going to get better. It's, the grass isn't just greener. You do have to do things differently. Things have to change in order for things to improve. That is true. But yeah, I mean, you can get unstuck and you can make changes and things can get better. Absolutely. And so, give yourself some credit. You deserve it, and then make the changes necessary. That's what I would tell people. And don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, I always think it's funny that sometimes people try to argue for making an ask by saying, "Oh, it doesn't hurt to ask." And I think we all kind of know the reality is that like asks often do come with risk, right? It's sometimes it can hurt to ask. And so to me, the reason to ask for what you want in life is not because it doesn't hurt to ask, because of course there's always some risk and uncertainty associated with anything, but because it hurts to not ask, right? It's painful to stick in the status quo and try and pretend that like you don't want anything, you don't want any change, that you're just fine with everything as it is. Because even if you're an acceptance of your life as it is, we all have aspirations and things that we want to see, impact that we want to make, before we're gone from this world. Um, and so I think, if I had to highlight a second mistake I see a lot, it would be that kind of waiting for a sure thing to ask of like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, or like, I don't know how it's going to land. So I'm just not going to say anything, or I'm going to wait for an expert to tell me I should ask this way, and I think often we end up waiting forever, right? Because there's no sure things, right? Like we have to sort of go forward and make our ask, even though there always is uncertainty associated.
Well, yeah, there's no sure things. I suppose on the rare occasion a sure thing can come around, but they're so rare. And the problem is if you're waiting around for that sure thing, you're going to wait a long time, and there's just going to be so many opportunities pass you by. So that's why when you see so many, if you're frustrated in your career because you see people around you getting promoted past you and you get overlooked over and over and over again for promotions, and you're like, but I'm doing a good job, why do I keep on getting passed over? In part, I mean, sometimes it's unfair. Sometimes there's bias, sometimes there's discrimination. There's all those things that can play a role, absolutely. But sometimes it's because we're not taking the risks and other people are. And, they're taking calculated risks, and it can backfire, but they choose to take the calculated risks, and we're playing it safe. And when we're playing it safe, we're allowing those opportunities to pass us by.
Mm.
And they will pass us by. They'll continually pass us by. It's a freight train, and things continually move. And we have to decide: are we going to jump on that train or are we not? And it's fine to not always jump on the train. Like, we're different life stages, different life circumstances. Sometimes it's the right time, sometimes it's not the right time, and you don't always have to endlessly be jumping on the train. I'm not suggesting that, but if you find yourself feeling like you're ready and you want to move to the next step, or you want to do something different, or you're feeling stuck, absolutely think about what an appropriate level of risk is that you're
Mhm.
willing to tolerate. Because like you said, sometimes there is risk associated with making the ask. But put yourself out there a little bit and see what can come from it. Because opportunities will pass you by if you just sit there waiting for the sure thing. I've seen that so many times with so many people, and I feel for them because they are capable, they are talented, they are someone that deserves the opportunity. But sometimes you have to go out and grab the opportunity, and it's not just going to fall in your lap.
Well, and part of the argument I make in my writing about this is that influence is a set of skills that we need to sort of proactively develop. And so if you're only making a big ask once a year of your boss of like, I want a raise or I want the promotion or what it is, you're not getting enough reps to sort of
Oh,
figure
that's a good
out
point. Yeah.
what's my effective way of leadership for my individual personality, for my context, for my environment, for my culture, right? And so, yeah, you're getting a little bit of feedback each year, but it's not enough to iterate and learn and really understand what works for you. And so I think that's, often, when potential clients come to me, they come looking for a sure thing, right? They say, Kenneth, like, you've worked with all these startups. Show me what's the right way to do X, right? Like, what's the way that's the absolute best practice that's always going to work? And I get that, right? I have compassion for that. Of course, like a sure thing is appealing, but often where we get to eventually is of them finding the way that's right for them, right? Because that has all these other benefits in terms of actually being effective for them in their context, for the goals that they have, and of having this sort of deep feeling of satisfaction and integrity associated with it. Because they're not spending this whole time trying to pretend to be someone else based on some best practice that they read, in a book or in a blog post or from some expert, but they're figuring out how to make influence in their life in a way that's authentic to them.
Right, right. And let's talk more about that influence piece, because you're, like you said, you need the reps. Some people are naturally skilled. You just kind of have that that charisma, or you just, people just kind of hang on every word you say. You just kind of have that natural kind of influence around other people. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people. Like, it just doesn't naturally come for me.
They can be practiced too.
Yeah, but it can be practiced. It is a skill you can develop. And I will say also, the vast majority of people are not like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's a super rare thing where someone just kind of exudes it, right? So the vast majority of people, they just work at it. It's a skill that you develop. And we're not talking about manipulation here either. We're talking about genuine influence, where you just, in a genuine invulnerable way, are able to share of yourself and influence others. But you have to exercise it. You have to get the reps, and you have to practice it, and do it in a way that's authentic to you, because people can tell when it's not, and they can tell when it's fake, and they can, so absolutely, you just have to you just have to be comfortable with it, in a way that fits your own personality and your own style. And if you're never engaged in the practice of making the ask, or trying to have that kind of influence, it's always going to be uncomfortable, and it's always going to be awkward, and it's always going to be clumsy, right? So I think that's just a super important lesson. I appreciate you articulating that.
Well, and what I find it really interesting is that I think sometimes people get so focused on kind of articulating or making their ask in the right way in order to sort of produce the response they want from other people. And the reality is, mostly the world tells us no, right? When we go out and try to make whatever change, especially if it's big and ambitious, right? Mostly we're going to get no back, right? And so we're going to have to learn from a lot of those no's before we get to a yes. And so if there's any one thing that actually helps with influence and relationship building, what I found is that it's handling the response well. It's not actually
Yes.
how you make the ask, right? Because of course we're all making asks all the time in our own way, be they sort of more direct or more subtle. And it's the question is, often when people do hear that no or something, something short of a yes anyway, they freak out in one way or the other, right? They get really entitled and get frustrated, or they, feel bad for themselves and kind of shut down and give up. And I think when we normalize no and say, oh, well, yeah, I expect, of course, mostly when I try to make change, the world says no. And that's absolutely fine, and as it should be, and doesn't threaten me, and is actually a good thing because it's a source of opportunity for me to learn from and build a relationship. Because guess what? If I want to influence people, probably I'm going to need to prove that I'm a good collaborator. And part of that is being able to take a no, right? To accept their boundaries, so that they know they can have a sort of respectful kind of negotiation with me.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great point. And the no's will come more often than the yeses will come. It's not personal. Like, that's something that you need to just remember, because people get defensive, they get yeah, sulky. Like, there's all these different reactions that people
Yeah.
have, and oftentimes it's that reaction that's worse than the actual no, right? Because then you may come across as petty, or you may come across as childish, or you may come across as, there's all these things that it's far worse than just making the ask and getting the no.
Mhm.
People expect you to ask for stuff. If I'm a manager, I expect my people to come to me and ask for things that I can't always give them,
Yep.
including a raise or a promotion, or a particular accommodation, or a particular time off when I can't do it, or like, there's all sorts of things that people are going to ask, and I know I'm not going to be able to give it to them, right? And so it's not a matter of, like, not being willing to receive the ask. But what does become very wearing is when people are coming to you all the time and then asking things, and then you try to be civil and cordial and collegial, and then every time it becomes a battle, right? And every time it becomes like this big ordeal, and that is wearing and frustrating. And
Totally.
to your point, if you can become known as the person that will advocate for yourself, yes, advocate for your people, yes, be thoughtful and articulate and have arguments and be willing to be persistent and resilient and even push, for the things that you need, but do it in a way that's super respectful and civil and thoughtful. People will respect you for it, and you'll earn so much credibility for that, because it's frankly rare,
Yeah.
to have that. And so that is such a valuable skill to develop. That just the response.
Totally. I mean, and a lot of this is really around emotional regulation, right? Because, we have all
Hmm.
these sort of, very deeply, held sort of, evolutionarily driven habits about that drive a lot of the reasons that this feels hard for people, right? Of like we get into fight or flight when we hear no, and it's really hard for us to think straight, right? We think about, wanting to have good relationships with people. And it gets really scary to sort of, try and make an ask of them because we're worried that it's going to hurt the relationship. And of course, historically, having these strong relationships with people is really, really important for safety. And so it takes practice to remind yourself, oh, like it may feel like I'm fighting a tiger in the Zoom meeting, right? When I'm trying to make this edgy ask for me, but I'm actually completely safe, right? Like these people are not going to reject me just because I asked for more resources or whatever it is.
Yeah, and everyone knows that you are going to be asking for resources, advocating for your team, advocating for yourself, whatever. Like they know it, they expect it. A good leader will do those things, right? So you should be, but they also expect you to do it in a thoughtful way that's also acknowledging that everyone else is going to be doing the same thing, and there are scarce resources, and we all have to be team players at the same
Yeah.
time, right?
Well, and part of
Yeah.
why I emphasize doing this work kind of iteratively versus saying, oh, I have this off the shelf way that works for everyone is just because environment and style is so individual, right? Because I work with people that are, very big and loud and forceful, and they need to, work in certain ways to sort of build their influence. And I work with people who are very sort of soft and reserved and subtle, and they can both be very influential in their ways. But the way that that's going to look and how they're going to operate is going to look very different. I've talked with people in other countries, and if you're in India or China, the culture there is very different. And so the sort of flat out direct way that may be appropriate in American context is just flat out not going to work there. In fact, it's going to be rude and inappropriate. And so I think to me, what's cool about sort of figuring out your mode of influence, both for the culture that you're in, the country, the company, et cetera, but also like yourself and your personality and your own individual inclinations, is that then you can both be incredibly effective in terms of making asks and building relationships with people, but you also don't have to pretend to be someone else. You can do it in a way that's actually authentic to you, which is a huge relief. And it's funny because I think a lot of people, when they look at this framework, they think, oh, it's about more effective ads, it's about better relationships. And yes, of course, it is about those things. But to me, the biggest benefit is really that relief of getting to be yourself, of being able to be influential and taking a stand for the things that you want in life, and being able to be yourself exactly as you are and escaping that imposter syndrome that is just sort of, inherent in a lot of modern life. And I think people often underestimate how much energy they're expending day to day, just trying to pretend that everything is fine and they don't want anything, and trying to be some other version of themselves that's not the true them.
Well, Kenneth, this has just been a really fun conversation. I note the time, which has just flown by. We're already nearing the end of our time together. I'm going to have to let you get on with your busy day. But before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So, my challenge to all of you folks is to go out and ask for what you want and to accept the response with grace. Because I think you'll find the more you practice that, the more you'll be able to make change in your life and be yourself along the way. So to learn more about this stuff, please feel free to visit my website at kberger.com, Kberger. You'll find links to everything there. Oh, got sirens coming past me in San Francisco. Um, and and follow me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I've got a mailing list there, or you can read more about Ask for What You Want on Substack as well. So it's afwyw.substack.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Kenneth, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Kenneth can do for you, check out the framework, all the great resources. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.